Hi, everybody, and welcome to Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. This week, my guest is the cultivation director at the 7 Points Cannabis Cultivation Facility in Portland, Oregon, Joseph Rosenberg. Joseph and I have never met in person, but we've been talking, discussing, and occasionally arguing about fish for nearly 2 decades on a small online fish forum. Over that time, I've known Joseph as a very opinionated person about fish, but he also has the background and the extensive knowledge to back up these opinions. We don't always agree, but we always love to talk. For today's episode, though, Joseph and I definitely agree on the standout status of the show he chose. Joseph picked December 11th, 1999 at the Philadephia Spectrum. This show reached legendary status very soon after it was played, and it definitely has a legitimate claim to be the best show of the year, if you don't count Big Cypress, of course. Throughout this interview, you'll hear why Joseph agrees with this ranking, about his history of getting into fish at a very young age, and plenty more. So let's take it back to December 11th, 1999 at the Spectrum in Philadelphia with Joseph Rosenberg. Joseph, thanks so much for being on Attendance Bias. How are you doing?
Brian, thank you so much for having me, first of all. I love the podcast already, and it's really a pleasure and an honor to be a part of it. And I am doing great today. I'm out of work a little early, and we've got some sunshine, and I'm about to talk about one of my favorite topics on earth. So cheers to that, and cheers to you.
Well, thank you. And you're in good company because this is obviously one of my favorite topics in the world to speak about. I think we should tell anyone who's listening that you and I, although we've never met in person, we have been talking about fish for, I would say, at least 15 years. Is that right?
Yeah. It's the beauty of technology, and just we were of the right age at the right time in the spot and place in the world to get to link up digitally. And before you know it, 2 decades have gone by.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and fish has been through a lot in those times, and obviously we have as individuals and as fans. So we're going to time travel today back to 1999. And before we get to 1999, I know that you grew up in New Hampshire, and now that you live in Portland, Oregon. And between those extremes of the coasts, how did fish enter your life?
I want to say that fish first came into a buzzword into my head through my father and his cousins, some really close friends. My parents were pretty young when I was born, so my dad was just 22 years older than me. So when I was 11, he was 33. So right in the wheelhouse of going to see the Grateful Dead in the Boston Garden for a few nights every year, and all kinds of other jam music and stuff like that. So he was the first one to mention the band Fish to me, him and his buddies, and they hadn't seen them, just had been hearing about them up and coming. And then, of course, it was high school. Some friends of mine had older siblings.
So hold on, I'm sorry to cut you off, but before, when you say you're 11 and now we're in high school, what year is this, just so we can get a sense of where Fish was in the sound and where they were in their development?
They might have been closer to 13 in 93 when I first heard about them. And then I also started high school when I was 13 in 93. I was very young. So around that time period, late junior high, early high school, 93, fish first became a thing that I would hear about. And then, it was like probably that next year, the second half of freshman year, first part of sophomore year. And some friends, older brothers, were talking about going fishing, and I didn't really understand it because it wasn't really the time of the year for that. And in retrospect, thinking back, like, these cats were talking about going fishing in PE class early on. Right. And it all started to make sense a little bit more as I got older. So, that's like the 93, 94 time period.
It's funny that you brought up that time period because we're separate just by a few years. I think I'm a few years younger than you, but I also got into the band in, I think it was 8th grade. So we have kind of parallel tracks, even though they're separated by a couple of years. I was getting into them in 96, 97, where you were a couple years earlier than that. And it's amazing when you look from 93 to 97, there's like an entire career there for most bands in terms of the change of their sound.
Absolutely. And I don't want to give off the false impression that I was 14 years old in high school getting deep into fish. I wasn't. Like, I got into
slinging lot
fish.
burritos at 14.
Funny you mentioned that. I actually made myself a veggie burrito and sold myself a couple of beers 2 for $5 before the podcast so I could get into that proper headspace.
Really in the mood.
Yeah, put my old tour shirt on, my old Mike's song Tough Gong tour shirt.
Yep,
really wanted to get the feeling. It was probably closer to 95, 96 that, Fish tape started to come into my life. So while I'd heard about the band and had an experience with them that's pretty atypical earlier than that, when I really first started listening was probably the 95 time period. And like a lot of us, it was early. It was the Junta stuff. It was Contact. Hearing a song like Contact and wondering, what the heck are these guys singing about? The tires are the things, it's just this funny little chorus. It's such an earworm. And then going into the rest of the album, especially, Union Federal and just Divided Sky, some of these really long songs and nothing like Contact at all. And I think Junta's, I don't want to say it's underrated, but there's just such a variance of songs on the record and what the band was willing to put out for their first release. I mean, a 25-minute uninterrupted jam on an album is pretty much unheard of, right?
Yeah, and it could be confusing for a new listener, I would even say, because in 6th and 7th grade, when you think about what we're used to in terms of popular music and what we're able to listen to, whatever's on the radio, for me, it was, hard rock and grunge and all that. And I was getting into classic rock also, but those are like 4-minute songs, verse, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, close. And my friend Danny and I, who were really getting into Fish together, we started our journey. He had a ping pong table at his house. And so he had this 5 CD changer, the apex of technology, music technology at the time. And we would each put in like 2 discs and someone, whoever, we'd flip a coin, whoever got the third. And Junta would be in there and I would put the Who in there and he would put Zappa in there. And so we were getting into our classic rock and Fish was like the new kid in our jukebox, And one time I'll never forget, we were playing ping pong and Iculus from Junta came on. And I just remember this band has more personality than almost any other group I listen to. As much as I love the music of Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles and, name any other that's on classic rock, like I hadn't heard anything like that.
Well, it's funny, just in the 4 bands you mentioned, Jimi Hendrix, Beatles, The Who, and Zappa, all heavy Fish influences. Right?
Yeah, it's no shock that I like them,
Yeah, you can see the bridge being created there between one part of your life and then the next. And of course, the classic rock's never going anywhere. I grew up with that as well.
Right.
I grew up with parents in the 70s. And, it's just interesting to me how those particular 4 bands, it's easy for me to see why Fish was going to be your wheelhouse.
Yeah. And I teach middle school. So I'm always around like 11, 12, and 13-year-olds as they're also discovering new stuff. And there's always going to be kids. This is why my girlfriend and I talked about this summer. We were in Massachusetts and we pulled into a shopping center with a head shop. And I haven't seen like a head shop outside of Greenwich Village in years. And I said, how could these places stay in business? And she said, there's always going to be a 12-year-old discovering Led Zeppelin. There's always going to be a kid who's new to school or new to high school and thinks that they're the first one to listen to Eclipse by Pink Floyd.
Get the tie-dye shirt, get the black light poster, I mean, it's stereotypical, but it's real.
Yeah. And Fish is, like you suggested, Fish is linked to that sound because that's kind of what they grew up on.
Absolutely. I mean, they're a direct result of everything we've just talked about. And, and I would argue that we're all better off for it.
I would agree. Yeah. And so you were getting into Fish you said like the mid 90s, you said starting really listening around 95. So when did you go to your first show and what do you remember about it?
Well, it's kind of a 2-parted question and I'll make it brief. The first time I ever went to any type of Fish experience at all, I didn't even go inside.
Okay.
It was in Old Orchard Beach. It was summer of 1994, July.
And where's
3rd.
Orchard Beach?
Old Orchard. It's in Maine. It's It's just right up on the southern coast of Maine, just on the other side of the New Hampshire border a little bit, on the other side of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Portsmouth, Portland, Maine. And there's a little minor league ballpark in Old Orchard. My family grew up there, so it's where we vacationed in the summer. All of my childhood was in Old Orchard. And And one year, in 94, I was, 13 or 14 and my dad's 36, pretty young. And word was that Phish, the buzzword all summer, was coming to the ballpark to play a show. And so we used to see bands like Aerosmith and, a little later on, I remember going to see Hootie and the Blowfish and 311 and all kinds of bands used to come through the ballpark, but
sure.
Phish played there. And so we just like strolled over. It's like a mile and a half from where we were. We decided to take the long walk after dinner. And as you're getting closer, you can like hear the music from the ballpark. And we just kind of like hung out. My dad just wanted to, I think, experience a little bit, and he wasn't really going to tell me much about that. He just wanted to go get his fix. And I don't mean fix, you know what I mean?
I know what you, we know what you mean.
Right. And so we're just like hanging outside the ballpark, listening to the music. It was daylight, so I'm sure it was first set. And, he was just like, this is Phish, and didn't even try to get tickets. I'm sure it wasn't sold out. It's probably just a few thousand people there, probably held 10,000, and
yeah, in the mid 90s for them to play a minor league baseball stadium, I would almost guarantee that there were tickets still available.
Right. Like less than 5,000 people present probably, and, so we hung out and I just remember some long stretches of music in the first set without vocals. I think a lot of people probably come to that realization early on.
Yeah.
I hadn't had Phish tapes at this point yet, in my life. So just long jams were Grateful Dead type of stuff. And I was trying to rebel from my parents probably during that time period. So I was pretty heavily into grunge as well. I really wanted to live in Seattle and really wanted to wear the flannel and the Doc Martens and the whole thing. So Phish was absolutely on the opposite end of the spectrum from where I was musically at the time. Mm-hmm. And so we experienced a little bit of the show, and my dad was like really amped up on our walk home, and he got to like see them a lot, and that was that. And so it was years later, a lot of Phish tapes and a lot of experiences later that I actually finally made it to my first show inside. I was out of high school by then, so it was in the fall of '97, and I was supposed to go to the first night of Worcester, which you did a podcast of already.
Right, with our friend Casey.
Right. And I was supposed to go to that show with my brother and a bunch of our friends, but I remember I got really ill before the show and like couldn't go. And so I missed my first chance to see the band. And so then some high school friends, one of their brothers had an extra ticket for Albany a couple weeks later, 12/12. And so I ended up like jumping in the car and had a ticket and ended up seeing my first show in Albany on 12/12/97.
I know we've talked otherwise about how you've seen hundreds of shows, right? By this point, do I have that correct?
Yeah, I'm over 160 at this point.
Right. So, and you've traveled all over.
Yeah. I think at one point I had seen the band in a couple of countries in at least 28 different states.
Wow. All right. I haven't really counted the states yet. I love stats. So that'll be my next project. And so on this show specifically, we've had a lot of guests pick shows from 1999. And I listened back to an episode from early on in this show, and I remember saying that I'm fairly delinquent in 1999 Phish. And that is no longer the case, because I've spoken to at least five people who chose shows from 99. But you're the first person to pick something from that December 99 run. Everyone loves the summer, and for good reason, of course. But this December 99 had a very distinct feel from that summer tour, which was very long. So the December 99 tour was made up of 14 shows in 17 days, which sounds absurd nowadays, because they always have the 3 days off or the 3 days and then 1 day off, etc.
And I actually jumped on for Rochester, so I did the final 11.
All right. So you saw by far the majority of the tour.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, it kicked off in December 2nd at the Palace in Auburn Hills, went south to Cincinnati for 2 shows, it cut east to Rochester, and then Portland, Maine, I believe, was next, before ending up in Philadelphia, December 10th. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I was just going to say 2 nights in Portland, then 2 nights in Philly.
Right. Philadelphia. And then today's show in Philly. And I'll just add this as an addendum. I went to the next night, the night after this show in Hartford, which was the 12th. Yeah. And after that, it went from Hartford to Providence, DC, Raleigh, and ended in Hampton. And of course, this entire tour was building up to Big Cypress, right?
Oh, I would say from the moment we stepped foot really like on lot in Rochester, uh, you couldn't help but just like feel the swell, just the intensity was palpable of Cypress was on the way. Recently Fish did one of their Tuesday night or Wednesday night dinner in the movies, and it was of the Ohio show from summer '99, where they actually talk about they're going to do their Florida New Year's show, and that was the first time that they had mentioned Florida or New Year's Eve '99 at all. So we were all just waiting for it to drop, and so from that point forward, but especially on the December run, anybody that was going to Cypress was just on cloud nine. Just every step you took was 2 or 3 feet off the ground. Like all of our dance moves were like levitated in the air. And as the band was just picking up steam, we were picking up steam. And I couldn't be more excited about seeing the band at Big Cypress at the time. My whole friend group, we were all going down in a big caravan. And so all of these gigs leading up to that was just like just this build and in a huge crescendo. So yeah, again, like that December '99 period was one of my best times of my entire life.
And I'm so jealous that you had that experience, because I was, like I said earlier, a couple of years younger than you. So I didn't have I don't know about maturity, but the resources for sure, but maybe also not the maturity to do something like that. When I went to Hartford, it was such a weird experience. But when I looked back doing research for this episode, I can't imagine why we chose Hartford, because Hartford was on a Sunday night. This show is on a Saturday that we're talking about today in Philly. Hartford is about 3.5 hours or so from New York. Philly's like 2 hours flat. And it doesn't make any sense looking back. But anyway, I really wish we made the better choice, because for years, I thought that Hartford December 12th show, '99, was like the most unremarkable Fish show I'd ever seen.
I would just like to touch base and cut the band a little bit of slack on that night.
Okay.
I think it was that day or the day prior, Trey's grandfather had died.
Yeah, he mentions that during, I think, Antelope.
Of course, of listening back, it does seem a little flat. The sets were a little short, although that was kind of a theme this tour too, a little bit shorter sets on some nights.
I noticed that about this Philly show, that the sets are kind of short.
This show, though, I will say, some of the best sets they've played have been around an hour 5, hour 10. I feel like
that goes back. I saw them in the Coliseum, at the Nassau Coliseum in October, and I think the first set on the 8th was literally 59 minutes. And when I got the tapes, I'm like, wait a minute, this can't be right. There's still a half hour left on this tape.
Absolutely. I remember, it's funny, that show, I was there too. And I remember when they busted into Antelope, the set was so young, in my opinion. I was like, oh, mid-set Antelope. But it ended the set because the set ended at an hour.
Right.
And it was like, okay, I think that this was pretty short. But, I feel like that show opened up with just like jam after jam after jam. And when that's kind of the case, I'm perfectly comfortable with a set that runs an hour, hour 5, hour 10, if they're really hitting it, compared to a set that's going to go an hour 30 with maybe some shtick or maybe a Fishman tune, which I'm into, but I always went for the meat, And
it's funny when talking about late December compared to late 99 compared to mid 99. Like I said, I've learned a lot about the band sound during 99, but December 99, I'm still a bit unacquainted with. In the summer, I feel like they were kind of firing on all cylinders, if not always at the same time, that they could play at 1,000,000 miles per hour and then just stop on a dime and then practice their dynamics by slowing and getting spacey. And then next thing you know, like at Oswego, they're playing Cat Scratch Fever in the middle of an Iculus, and it's bonkers and everyone's losing their mind. And then there's a Mike song that just takes off into outer space and comes back like this sonic wormhole. And then in December 99, it seems a lot spacier. It seems a lot more ambient. And there was ambience in the summer, but it seemed to be the focus of December 99. You've heard a lot more of these shows than I have. Am I wrong on that, or do you have another view of it?
No, I think you're dead on. And to tell you the truth, I think it started, that kind of sound started at the beginning of like the fall tour, because we did the entire summer tour, my brother and I. We did all 20 or 21 shows or whatever. And, around the beginning of that fall tour, they kind of kicked it back a notch. And I wasn't sure if that was part of the West Coast vibe, because West Coast shows are different than East Coast shows. They just are.
Definitely.
Having seen a bunch everywhere, and a good majority of my shows over the last 12 to 15 years have all been on the West Coast. I think maybe that had something to do with their style of playing. Of course, they played with Phil that fall. And I feel like anytime they have a really prominent guest, their sound will kind of shift in the shows, maybe either just before or after that guest. And Phil definitely classifies as a prominent guest. I think that was a hallmark moment for everybody to get to see him on a trampoline there.
Definitely unforgettable.
But then listening back to a lot of the shows, there's a really long Boogie On in Southern California from that tour. I don't remember the date. And, they were playing really long jams, but they weren't the breakneck kind of jams that we were hearing on the summer tour.
Right. And that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. And we were all about that. We kind of felt like it was a little bit more of like what they were doing in 98, a little bit more of that ambient textured stuff was starting to peek through. It could have been that they started playing tab songs too, because Gotta Jaboo and Sand really came into the mix.
Yeah.
Those aren't songs where Trey is just going to machine gun over. Those are songs that are designed to build a soundscape, build the layers step by step, and then like slowly climb the pyramid. And so when December came around, I think the band they were still shapeshifters. They were just doing whatever they were feeling like. They had Big Cypress on the horizon. They had the bull by the horns. And I was just really, really noticing that their slower, more methodical, more layered sound started earlier than I thought.
So stepping into set one of December 11th, 99 at the Spectrum, at Core States at the time, the Core States Spectrum in Philly, my first thought was when there's questions on like Phish Facebook groups or forums, Phish forums, the questions like, construct your dream set lists, like your fantasy tour, like your fantasy set list. This first set looks exactly like I would imagine most people's would look. It opens with Harry Hood and goes straight into Mike's Simple Weekapog. And it's like, but wait, stop. How do you do that? Every song in this first set sounds like we're deep in the second set already. How did this Harry Hood hit you guys when it started? Do you remember any of this?
It's funny. I remember all of the openers really from that whole run. I've got vivid memories of almost every night, but this particular night and the night before, which the 10th and the 11th are inextricably tied together. We'll mostly talk about the 11th here, but the 10th opened with Tweezer, and they had done that a few times back in 97. They opened up a couple of nights with Tweezer early and late in that December tour. So it wasn't like, oh man, this is the first time they've ever done this, but it was still okay, Tweezer opener in Philly, let's get down to business. So the next night, we didn't really know what to expect. I mean, they were kind of all over the place all summer and all fall with openers. So they come out and they drop the lights, and right away, listening back on these audience tapes, and I'm really glad I got to listen to an audience version recording of this, because for me personally, getting to hear the crowd swells, knowing that I was part of that, just still gives me the chills. And so no one expected Hood. No one back in Fantasy Tour days, no one picked Hood as their opener. No one got that one right. I mean, there was a lot of talk at set break about the show up to that point, but most of it was about the Hood, and people were trying to guess when the last Hood opener was. And I didn't know. I just remember that it was a long time ago because I had read the almanac, the Phish almanac, the Farmer's Almanac a few times through during my formative years of the band. And so I always had a thing for dates and set lists and
yeah, me too,
and all that stuff. So knowing full well my memory was good on the topic at that time of my life, I was pretty sure that it had been in the 80s, but no one knew that it had gone all the way back to 85. And it was madness. It was a party. It was a celebration.
Yeah. And this is a solid Hood. It has that kind of extended intro with, I couldn't think of a better phrase than slide whistle kind of effects, like whirring slide whistle during it. If I didn't know better, I would guess that we were at the second set closer as opposed to the first set opener.
Right. And even during the jam, like when it's really peaking, they've got this vibe of, we've been playing for 2.5 hours. We're in the zone right now.
Yeah. And there's no warm up.
No warm up to just come out and just drop this long introed Hood, a lot of fun interplay, Trey misses the Harry to enter the song because the band is like so amped up about just playing, and the crowd swells going on during the song.
Well, yeah, I wrote that down, that there are, in my notes were, in quotes, insane crowd reactions. And especially there's a peak at about 17 minutes in that they're really just nailing it, and the whole crowd just goes so loud. Like you said, when you're hearing it on an audience tape, you really get the feel as if you're sitting in your seat.
Right. And it's, if I remember correctly, it's Trey is really delivering at the time.
Yes, definitely.
And you're 16 minutes into the Harry Hood show opener and Trey is delivering, and it's just, it's involuntary at that point that you're just screaming out. It's that's what the band is eliciting as a reaction. And that's about as good as it gets, in my opinion, with Phish. That's why we go, is to be able to experience that type of involuntary reaction to the music.
Yeah. And more involuntary reactions. Next is a Mike's groove.
Oh boy.
Again, in the first set right away. And it's Mike's Simple Weekapog, which is very common.
Hydrogen also in there.
Oh, that's right. Mike's Simple Hydrogen Weekapog. Mike's song was very good. It was a very good year for dark Mike songs, 1999 was.
Yeah, like I want to say like driving and like just dissonant, dark, like the red lights are going on at the show during these jams.
Yeah, and it's very much with Page on his organ. That kicks me back automatically to 1999 when I hear Mike doing their like do 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 do, and Page on his organ backing him up. That, like, to me, I'm like, that's better than a DeLorean for me to be in another place.
And Trey's almost doing a little bit more of like some screeching stuff than like melodic stuff. And they're just really creating this. For them, it's almost like an industrial style soundscape, almost as industrial as they ever would have gotten. You know, they were working as a unit. No one was taking solos or trying to be a hero of the moment. Everybody was just working towards this deep, dark pocket to where something's going to bubble up from it.
And then after Simple, I wrote that Trey does have a lot of long sustained notes, which was not always the case in 1999. Sometimes his playing was schizophrenic. It wasn't always as patient as it appears in this show. And then there's some very beautiful melodic playing around 7 minutes in, and before long, they're reaching for the heavens. It's so great. And then by the end, they quiet down again, which is wonderful.
You know, it really just goes back to the idea. It sounds like a band that had already been playing for about an hour and 45 minutes this show. They were at that spot where they were so incredibly comfortable of dropping this this somewhat delicate Simple. You know, it doesn't get to 96 fall chaos and madness.
No, it's a different world.
Right. It stays pretty true to itself. I just remember looking around and, you know, we're talking about Hood, Mike Simple at this point, and people were just like blissed out, kind of just like looking around, awe-inspired at what's going on. This is a first set and everybody is just feeling like they're on top of the world.
Right. And then after Simple is Hydrogen, which is standard and well played. And it closes with Weekapog, which was very, very fast. I wrote, this is what I think of when I think 1999, is a sick peak at 4 minutes, pushing the boundaries again at 4 minutes. What a shot of adrenaline.
Absolutely. Huge energy throughout this. Trey started pushing, like you were saying, somewhere in the 4 to 5 minute period. So there's a nice bit of opportunity for the band to get to communicate to each other, see where they wanted to take it, and then Trey takes the lead on this one, which he's been known to do on Weekapog Groove. I just remember about this jam live that, you know, we haven't really talked about Kuroda a whole lot, but, you know, being indoors in the wintertime, you get to experience the full throttle Kuroda, both sets. And during this Weekapog Groove was the first time where you almost feel like weightlessness in your stomach, like that good type of anxiety, that good type of
I was going to
anxiousness.
say, if you're doing it right, you feel that way.
Yeah, the good type of anxiousness where like Kuroda was absolutely in sync, and just the way that he was flashing these lights around the band as Trey just kept pushing during the Weekapaug groove was just something that I won't ever forget. And the band was delivering, and the crowd is again going off crazy during this Weekapaug groove. And I remember when it was over, as it started to wrap up, as they're heading back to the lyrical section, I remember thinking, I need to get some water right now.
Yeah. I think a lot of people probably felt that way, and the band had your back because they played when the circus comes to town, kind of a chill out, a breather. And you talk about the band communicating. Mike was even hitting the fight bell in between Weekapaug, and when that's him saying, we're in, like, this is for real. And after Circus, they bring it back up with Scent of a Mule, which has a really cool jam halfway through. Better, I think, than the usual Trey and Page Mule duel. There's like this whole Mid-Eastern, at least those my words of saying it.
Absolutely, and Mule kind of has, I don't want to transgress too deeply, but I do just want to touch on Circus. I would never go to get water during Circus. I think it's my favorite cover ballad that they do.
I think so. I was thinking that too.
And I just love that song so much. And for some reason, whenever I hear it, I'm always sent right back to the Lemon Wheel, like that really emotional Trace solo. It'll always have a special place in my heart. So I was probably too busy giving everybody that I could see hugs. And then when Mule started up, I knew I had about 4 minutes, maybe 5, until the weirdness. And so that was when I ran to get my water. I'll sacrifice the opening of Mule over the beauty of Circus anytime. Just wanted to put that on record.
We have it down.
Absolutely. So yes, Mule kicks in, and you never know what to expect with Mule, right? Who's going to duel? Which way is it going to go? Is it going to be totally chaotic? And you just know it's going to be about 10 to 15 minutes, and you're probably never going to see anything like it again. And that was this. The band is often inspired to change the tempo, change the beat in order to move away from the clap progression. And I feel like when that happened, that's when we got this really super interesting full band jam. There was no duel per se, really atypical, but no specific duel until Trey comes in with those familiar licks a few minutes before they take it to the end. So I'd classify this as an atypical Mule.
I agree, and I loved it. I listened to it a number of times. I listened to this whole show twice or 3 times in preparation for this, but the Mule I kept going back to. That jam, I think it's about 2.5 minutes right in the middle of the song that I never heard a Scent of a Mule like that. So that anytime that happens, it's worth noting. And they closed the set already with Cavern. I said it feels like a really quick set, although the first half was extraordinarily powerful.
Absolutely. And when Cavern hit up, one thing I took in my notes is that I had no idea how long the set was at this point, so no one really knew if this was going to end it or not. And, the band had been doing kind of like some fake closers where they would like drop a Rocky Top on top of something or drop a Squirming Coil out of nowhere, so we weren't really exactly sure they just opened the show with Hood, right? So who knows what the fuck they're going to close this
all bets are off.
And, we just remember the driving energy of Cavern Fish way back long before I was like going to shows or planning on seeing shows. Just this was one of those first, you mentioned Picture of Nectar early on in your development. And, it obviously was for me too. And, it was just, there's just something about Picture of Nectar and these songs on it. And so just always glad to hear it.
Yeah.
I think we were probably hoping maybe they'd drop the extra lyrics. They had been doing that a couple of times the last couple of years, 97, 98, that extra verse. I turned the blade
the
back
knife on her tongue, right?
Yeah, slashed her on her tongue, exactly. But that was not meant to be this night, maybe because Trey couldn't remember any of the words.
Well, forget extra lyrics. He forgot the actual lyrics, but
classic.
It wouldn't be a classic Fish show if that didn't happen. He always not always, but it feels like he always does it in the best shows. And of course, at the end, we'll be back in 15 minutes.
Oh yeah, right. We'll see you when you see you. No rush.
Yeah, right.
Just make it worth it. And I forgive you. Well, we forgive you for the lyrics because that set was baller.
And then set 2 begins with Boogie on Reggae Woman, which has another lyric flub, but that's totally fine because the lyrics to Boogie on Reggae Woman are kind of interchangeable anyway in the beginning. And you can feel it. You can feel that something fun is really building because the tempo is perfectly groovy. Mike steps forward at around 5 minutes, and it gets really funky with great cymbal play with Fishman. Fishman, for most of the show, is just very solid and straight, as much as he could be anyway. But in this Boogie On, his cymbals really do a lot of talking.
Absolutely. And if I could just take 1 second to talk about set break.
Sure.
So we're up in our section. We're taking a breather. All of a sudden, there's this one dude, and this one guy both nights, one single guy. He gets up and he starts motioning for people. He's trying to start the wave. Mm-hmm. And on the night of the 10th, he succeeded. And then on the night of the 11th, we're like, here's this dude again. He's going to try to start the wave again, of course. And he does. And he succeeds again. And I'll tell you that it's set break. The lights are up and everybody's like trying to take a break from what just happened. And there's like 20,000 people doing the fucking wave at set break for like 10 or 12 minutes at least. Like, and it's like, and as it was going around, like that part of the venue was like cheering. So there's like this constant scream and the wave, and it just goes to tell about the energy level of everybody there that night. Like everybody in attendance was just really ready to get it from the minute we walked in. Didn't recede during set break at all, and then this wave, just this enormous wave at set break. And been to a lot of shows since that time, never saw the wave again, so it just was one of those really beautiful moments that I'll always remember about Phish was that, they're even set break, everybody was getting as rowdy as they could. So back to the show here. So yes, Boogie on. Exactly how I want set 2 to start. They've been playing long extended versions all year, and no one knows if there's going to be a 5-minute or a 20-minute version of anything at this point. So let's just see what happens. And, they finish set 1 with some lyrical miscue. They start up set 2 with some lyrical miscue. Again, I'm fine with that. If you're going to bring the heat, I don't care about the words, to tell you the truth.
Right.
Trey was smiling so heavily during the lyrical fuck up parts where, it just makes it real. Right. It just humanizes the guy. And like, yes, he's this virtuoso and he's one of the 4 main reasons we're all there, but he's just a guy, man. And, he's going to make mistakes and he's going to capitalize on those errors. And I do feel like a lot of the times that Phish was in a really good headspace when there was like a miscue. That's when they really take it to the next level.
I agree.
And so send it. I'm all aboard.
Yeah. And then the next level comes when they play Sneakin' Sally. It takes a minute for Trey to get that guitar progression down, but once he does, the crowd goes nuts, and he's so smooth. It's so funky, and it's so smooth. It comes back to the chorus, and then it kind of fades out with 1999 loops. I can't think of another way to put it. That's it.
I agree. There's a little bit of that. There might be a little bit of that funk siren, like behind the scenes going on, and there's a couple of layers. But, the Sally, I remember so specifically, like, so they come on a Boogie On and they hit the first couple of chords and we're thinking AC/DC Bag and then Sneakin' Sally. And then it was like, it's kind of muddled. I don't know if controversial is a good way to put it, but there's definitely differing schools of thought about what was going on with the band during like this song segment. Were they discussing, arguing? Was there some type of musical battle going on stage, because it certainly seemed like, to me like there was a couple of members of the band that wanted to take it to AC/DC, but Trey was the one that was really kind of mostly playing the Sneaking Sally theme and melody, but he was in the wrong key.
Yeah.
And so the band's like, you want to play this song, but you're not even in the right fucking key, man. Like, we're going to take it another direction. And then they do finally take it to the B chord, and they send it into Sneaking Sally. But for a couple of minutes there, maybe a good 45 seconds, it was totally up in the air what song they were going to play.
And at the end, it fades out, kind of spacey 99 typical stuff, into Ghost, which is, I think, the highlight of this set, either this or the next one, 2001. But this is really where things lift off for this set, at least.
I couldn't agree more. And honestly, this was probably one of the hottest, if not the hottest segment of the entire tour of the 11 shows that I saw. It's one of the main reasons why I really wanted to talk about this show was the energy, the vibe of the crowd, which we've gotten into quite a bit. Because, one thing we haven't mentioned over every song is that, like, throughout the first set and into the second set, there are just random crowd bursts, just random swells through the crowd. And, glow sticks were definitely very much a thing at this point still. They were kind of trending out, but, the great glow stick wars of 1997 and 98 were kind of a thing of the past, but they were still happening to smaller degree during 99. And so a lot of those crowd swells are when Kuroda would cut the lights and the glow sticks start popping off. When the Sally starts to break down into its ambient outro, about a minute before, maybe a minute and a half before, Mike clearly is on the level that we're taking this into Ghost. And, you can follow along with Mike and then as they start to bring it down and they start to get into the Ghost proper, there's obviously a giant crowd swell there, because that's about as smooth of a segue, I think, as you're going to find.
Yeah. I thought when I was listening to it, if only every time could be like this. And that's not to suggest that it's ever sloppy. That's not what I mean. But it was just so perfect. It was as if someone had planned it out. But at the same time, it wasn't. It just felt so right when they transitioned into Ghost.
Exactly. Like, it was manifested in the stars for this set to be at this spot in this part of our lives here, and once they're through the lyrical section of Ghost, I feel like, there's a segment where everyone is starring. They're all doing their own thing independently, and it's working so well as a cohesive unit. Like, this is a band that is dialed in, that has played, 55 shows or 60 shows already this year. And, they're coming out on fire. They played a bunch of shows this run, and it was almost hypnotic, I feel like. And, 7 minutes in, things start to get pretty psychedelic. Page moves to the clav a little bit. And I think at that point, we're looking at each other going, okay, this is going to be one of those jams. I think this one's going to go long.
Yeah. And you're right. It has something for everybody. You're right about Mike kind of digs deep, and then Page takes over, and then Mike modulates to match Page, and then they hang on to a groove. Trey joins in on top before it reaches this kind of major key, what nowadays would be called bliss jamming. And throughout most of it, Mike is still hanging on to that Ghost bass line. And it just seems like the whole universe is swirling around while he's, as a bass player does in rock music, is just kind of holding it down. And then toward the very end of it, this is December 99 to me. This is what I hear in my head when I think of this part of the band's career. It just kind of, Fishman drops out around 15 minutes, and it's, I don't like this phrase that I wrote, but I said complete noise.
It's a soundscape. And it's
a
funny,
soundscape.
The band is kind of, I felt like at the time, and I felt like listening back now, the band was creating a soundtrack to what was happening inside the venue. So during the Ghost, around 14 minutes in, people started connecting glow rings into the giant snakes like they started
a
on
glowworm, I'll have you know.
Right, the glowworm, right. So I want to say it started on New Year's Eve, 98. That was the first time I ever saw it.
Yeah, I remember that, yep.
We're sending the glow all up into they were
It
really
was
long,
huge,
crawling all over like giant octopuses, right? And so that was happening at this show too on the floor as Ghost was really getting into the 12, 13, 14-minute mark. So as the band starts to take it out into the dissonance and the deep space that would formulate the 2001 intro, there's just what's going on the floor was probably a hell of a thing to see. And Paige and Mike are just like destroying it, and Trey's just probably on his keyboard creating more layered effect. I don't really have a memory of like Trey specifically on stage at this point because we were all just captivated by the glow snakes. But I do want to say that he was December 99. That was like the heyday for Trey's mini keyboard set, right? I want to say.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and this is for a very specific type of taste. I mean, I like it because I enjoy like spacing out to soundscapes and stuff. But I could see, and I had this thought at a couple of shows in 2000, how this could be be off-putting for certain fans, where there's nothing to hold on to. There's no center.
Certainly. Like those folks that started seeing the band in the early 90s and had basically like stopped seeing the band by 96, this type of jam wasn't for them.
Right.
But for those of us that got on a little bit later into the mid to late 90s with some of the chaos and the David Bowies and the Tweezer Fest and everything like that, this is just a culmination of that. And of course, when it builds and drops into a 15-minute powerhouse of 2001, to me, I felt like 2001 probably started about 4 minutes earlier than it did, and Ghost might have ended a few minutes earlier than the track listing has.
Yeah.
But I think you're just picking nits at that point.
Yeah, well, yeah, it depends on where in the space section you decide the next track begins.
Right.
But 2001 is another perfect call. We were like already in the cosmos, so it's like we're ready for more of this. Page keeps his synthesizers going in the intro, and the intro is very extended, which was normal, I think, for the time period in the late 90s. You listen back to 2001 from like 93 when it debuted for Phish, and they're like 3 minutes.
The entire song is like 3 minutes.
The whole thing is literally like a 3-minute track. But here, I don't even think they go to the 2001 chorus until like 6 minutes in.
Maybe even later. It might have been 7.5 or 8 minutes, to tell you the truth. That's something that they started doing in the last couple of years prior. That was 2001, I think, could be up there with one of the songs of the year in both 97 and 98.
Yeah, for sure. And during this intro, Trey is like subtly using his wah. He's kind of like speed funk jazz jamming, I guess. Fishman is using his cymbal bell, which is very tasteful. And then after the first chorus, it's like there was more like jazz funk that we heard kind of in the beginning of that Ghost jam. It kind of comes back. Like they weren't done with it. In
the second section? Is that what you're talking about?
Of 2001, yeah.
Yeah, and man, like one of my fondest memories is Mike has this bass line. I'm not exactly sure how deep into the jam it is. It might be around 10 minutes where he's just hitting this really funky descending bass line. And it's just one of the best pieces of bass playing that I think he's done in 2001 and of all the great ones. That second segment specifically, like coming out of everything that had happened this set, and Mike's just up there like owning that section of the jam. It was just pure elation, just hugs all around, like fucking party time, like woohoo.
I was blown away by it. I loved it so much.
Yeah, it's some of Mike's best playing of the night. Absolutely. On a night where I feel like Mike might have been the hero of this night. Starting from Harry Hood, he was, in my opinion, he was the winner, the best player of that jam. And all throughout the rest of the show, I feel like this was one of those nights where, man, Mike was just on point. And, during this song, during the second part of the jam, before the second 2001 chorus, Kuroda had cut the lights and there's glow sticks going again. And so you can hear giant crowd swells. A lot of the crowd swells are when Kuroda would cut the lights, and then like the band, the crowd would light up the band in their own unique way. And that definitely happened during this version of the jam. I just remember it being so dark that like you could barely even see. And I just love that about indoor shows so much. It's just my favorite.
And again, I can't believe we're already at the end, is Down with Disease, which is usually the second set opener, not the second set closer.
Yeah, almost like they're working in reverse here, right?
Right, yeah, Hood opens, right?
I mean, realistically, this was one of those nights where, outside of the 2001, it does kind of feel like the sets were reversed. And there are some of those nights where you kind of feel a little bit cheated in the second set if they really blow out the first set like they normally would have set two. But this was one of those nights where, no, both sets were pretty powerhouses. And, I take Down with Disease to close set two, and I've seen it a few times in that spot. To me, that means that whatever just happened, Trey was feeling it.
Yeah, Machine Gun Trey made an appearance.
Was feeling it. Yeah, he was absolutely 100% on board with what the band just laid down, and he wants an opportunity to rip a hole through the space-time continuum and the fabric of life, and allow us to basically digest everything that just happened with one of the most beautiful fish riffs, like in the arsenal is the Down with Disease riff, and the jam itself was, 10 or 12 minutes, pretty concise. They take it to, it's really like it's a type 1 jam, bottom line. It's type 1. I don't really think they take it too far out. But
yeah, but they also, Trey throws or the band does throw all their tension and release tricks in there for this. Sure. This isn't like in 94, I feel like there were a lot of Down with Disease type 1 jams that were like 7 minutes long, and it was just pedal to the metal the whole time.
No, exactly. And, the band really, really kicks it into a pretty high gear early on. And then as they're working through, how they want to attack like the meat of the jam, 5-6 minutes in, Trey kind of starts to communicate to the band that he's going to step up. He starts to play a few more notes and then a few more notes. And then before you know it, I mean, Trey is just playing his most frantic playing of the entire night, even eclipsing the Weekapog group.
Well, yeah, earlier. I was right about to say, it reminds me of Weekapog from earlier.
Yeah. And Trey's just letting everybody know, like, hey, this might have been one of those nights where there was a lot of full band jamming, a lot of full sound, a lot of soundscapes. But I still have a few tricks up my sleeve, and we're going to, send everybody into the encore super high energized, because that was the theme of the night. Like, the energy never relented. There was no cool down song this set.
Right. You're right.
When then in set two, it's Ghost and Down with Disease. I mean, I guess Ghost, of course, was the latest song played on any of their records, but there was no would-be farmhouse songs for the entire show. And that was really, really rare for 99.
Yeah. And about that encore was Possum, which, no surprises there. But again, not even Possum was typical this night. There was secret language signs.
Language.
Yeah. Yes. Which I hadn't heard since like 92 in Possum,
I don't really remember another time hearing one. I'd have to look back through all of the show notes, of course, and I might have caught one somewhere along the way, but I don't recall ever hearing another one. And I remember being so focused in that as soon as you hear the first trill and then Trey hits the second trill and then he's cueing everyone in, he hits the 4 descending notes for the all fall down signal. And, I think I was probably one of 10 people that went to the floor. And this is the Spectrum, and it's disgusting, and the floor is an awful place to be.
It's Philly.
It's like maybe the worst floor in the country to hang out on for any amount of time, and was glad to do it. And at this point, I wasn't played out on Possum. I had no problems hearing Possum. I didn't think that it was one of those songs that was going to make me have a restroom break, or I know maybe they played a lot in 3.0. It's one of those tunes where people are a little tired of it, but at this stage, 12-minute encore Possum with a secret language after a show like this. I mean, a wise fan once told me a long time ago that you cannot judge a show by the encore. The encore is only a cherry on top. It's only bonus. Like, you can take a show on its merit of what happens in set 1 or 2, but, kind of rule the encore as its own thing. And so I really just stopped paying attention to encores at that point in my life. And so now sometimes they're great. Sometimes it's, a little lackluster, whatever. It's not about that for the band. It's not about that for me.
And looking at overall, this is an excellent show. Almost every song in the first set felt like we were deep in the second set. And the second set went so quickly that there was never a time to let up. It was so thrilling. It was always interesting. Personally, I thought Hood was my highlight for set 1 and Ghost for set 2. And the best part of it all, when you take a step back, seeing the forest for the trees, I thought the show was very representative for what they did in 1999. It was super fast rock jams paired next to slow, spacey, ambient soundscapes.
I couldn't agree more. If somebody were asking me, does this show have any best ever versions? No, there's not a single best ever version of anything played on this night, but that's not really what this show was about. This show was about unbridled energy, and it was from the minute everybody walked into the venue to the minute that the possum ended. There was no letdown. Again, no breather song in the entirety or set 2. Like, who do these guys think they are? Like the Disco Biscuits at this point? Like, they're just going to play 4 songs over an hour with no break, and it's like running a marathon. You're tired after that. I saw pretty much all the great shows, that 725.99 and then that Boise show and the Phil show. But this was my show of the year that I saw. Of all the shows I saw besides Cypress, this, in my opinion, was the best show of 1999, top to bottom. Anyway, what a couple of nights, man. Just lucky to have been in attendance on this one.
And now it's time for the attendance bias fact check. Joseph's first Phish experience, where he toured the lot with his dad at the ballpark in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, was on July 3rd, 1994. There's a beautiful recording of the show on Phish.in. The show features the first electric version of the old home place, a stunning Reba that features Somewhere Over the Rainbow right in the middle of the jam, and a wild split open and melt complete with a tease of Jimi Hendrix's Third Stone from the Sun. For the Old Orchard Ballpark, Joseph estimates that it holds probably about 10,000 people, but according to Wikipedia, the park actually holds just 6,000 people. I could not find any data as to whether or not the Phish show that summer was sold out, but I would still bet that it wasn't. When Joseph was talking about how many times he's seen Phish, I said that I would have to look up how many states I've seen them in. After some further research, it turns out that I've seen them in 16 states and Mexico. I still have a way to go before matching Joseph's count of 28 states. During our discussion of the fall and December 1999 tours, Joseph brings up the time when Phil Lesh came on stage with the band. This show was on September 17, 1999 at the Shoreline Amphitheater in Mountain View, California. Phil came on toward the end of the second set for a bass jam at the end of You Enjoy Myself. He played Wolfman's Brother, Cold Rain and Snow, and then an encore of Viola Lee Blues. And yes, Phil did jump on the trampoline for You Enjoy Myself. The long Boogie on Reggae Woman that Joseph was thinking of was from the night after Phil Lesh, on September 18th, 1999, at the Coors Amphitheater in Chula Vista, California. That night, Boogie On opened set 2 and goes for over 22 minutes. It's a definite must-listen for any fan. This show, December 11th, 99, opened with Harry Hood. Joseph mentions that the last time Harry Hood opened a show was in 1985. That show was way back on October 30th, 1985, and not only did Hood open that show, but it's the first known live version of the song. That's it for the fact check, and that's it for today's episode. I would like to thank Joseph Rosenberg of 7 Points Cannabis in Portland, Oregon, Phish.net for providing all the info we'll ever need, and Phish.in for supplying all of the clips throughout this episode. Please support Attendance Bias by leaving a rating and a review of the show on your podcast app of choice. Failing that, how about just telling one person about the show? You find one person who might be interested, give them a heads up, and you've helped out this show immensely. Once again, I am Brian Weinstein, and thank you for listening. See you next time on Attendance Bias.